Prof. I will take you back to the issue of a united Africa, one Africa. My take on the issue is that there seems to be a lack of political will, or to a certain degree, selfishness on the part of African states by choosing at times to be individualistic rather than considering the collective. Well, I mean, I've often heard words like, we are first responsible for our people before we can be responsible for others. But then again, you cannot blame them, considering that the standard of governance in Africa has been found wanting. If we are going to unite, then we have to have a uniform way of doing things. There is no way Botswana is going to say we are going to open our borders and allow for Zimbabweans to move in freely when we know the turmoil that is happening in Zimbabwe. In one way or the other, it is going to affect Africa. I mean, to affect Botswana in the sense that the movement is probably going to be one-sided, and so the benefit is also going to be one-sided. So I think there is a need for African leaders to also take responsibility and take care of their people, so that when we unite Africa, we unite a uniform Africa. We don't unite people who are liberated with people who are fleeing persecution. That is one. Two, the issue of the free skies. It is also an issue of political will. My position is that, for example, there is no reason why traveling within Africa should be more expensive than traveling from Africa to Europe.
Correct.
Or to the United States. But I think it is because of this mismanagement of state-owned enterprises, in particular national airlines, which are always eating away at government's money, which are not competitive. In fact, there is a strong lobby for national airlines to be abolished completely, because apart from the fact that they are flag carriers that confer national pride, they are poorly run institutions. Of course, in the case of Africa, I mean, the only exception is Ethiopian Airlines.
Correct.
Even South African Airways is making huge losses. I can't say anything about Air Botswana, But all of these things these are the issues that cause the high price hikes, and then they make it so difficult for Africans to travel within Africa, and so my belief is that if we are going to have a proper continental free trade agreement, it first has to start with the African Union insisting on good governance from its member states.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
I can't agree with you more. And the beauty is that the African Union has actually recognized that. If you look at the 7 pillars that I've mentioned before of the African Agenda 2063, they recognize that you want to create a prosperous Africa where there is peace, where there is transparency, where there is democracy, where there is diversity, where there is strength in the economy. And once that happens, what will happen is that you'll allow free movement of goods and services. You'll harmonize to ensure that there is no tariff and non-tariff barriers. And this is not going to happen within a short period. What has happened recently, for example, in ECOWAS have said we are going to have one currency by the year 2020. They may not actually have a single currency by the year 2020, but the fact that they are thinking about it, they are learning from the European problem that we had with Greece, Spain, and Portugal. Africa has many examples to learn from. So I have no doubt in my mind that if we learn from the mistakes of the European Union, if we learn from the mistakes of other continents, then we can leapfrog some of these stages and ensure that we begin to move in the right direction. Which means, for example, Africa has 33 currencies. In order to move towards a single currency, you've got to deal with macroeconomic issues, you've got to deal with microeconomic issues, and it's going to take not less than 50 years in my estimation. But as long as we are moving in that direction, we will be doing a good thing. When you talk about African airlines and the free skies, look at the history of Europe and America. We know quite a number of European airlines that collapsed. Look at the Olympics in Greece. Look at BOC in Europe. Look at the Pan Am. So that sometimes we talk as if Africa will be the first continent that will have these failures. Africa is not. Africa is only visible because it's beginning to move in that direction. But I agree with you that having seen the problems of those other countries, we should not repeat them. We should now learn from them and do the right thing. And I think that voices like yours and many others which are not given the oxygen of publicity are beginning to talk at universities and at different fora. And if the politicians were to listen to these voices and begin to appreciate that in the long term, you may appear to be doing well today, but in the next few years, Malawi is not going to survive by exporting tobacco because we are banning tobacco everywhere. So we must find something else to do. And once you do that, you will discover that the person who moves from Zimbabwe to Botswana is moving to add value rather than escaping an oppressive economic system. And that will be the beauty, so that we strengthen each other. And in 100, I'm not romantic about African unity, because sometimes we tend to romanticize this thing. It is not to be romanticized. It's not going to take less than 100 years to achieve some of the things that we want. But the fact that we are moving in that direction is a good thing.
Thank you, Professor Lumumba. Alfred Masokola, are the politicians tapping into this dream? Are the politicians coming forth? Is African political hygiene also in this dream? As you wrap up.
If you look at what was happening in South Africa recently, a lot of people I'm talking about xenophobia. A lot of African leaders, a lot of citizens of the continent were complaining that it's like South Africa is not responding positively and in a desired way to deal with this problem. And you look at when we talk about the idea of united Africa, some citizens of other countries like Botswana, maybe like South Africa, they may not necessarily buy into this idea. They consider other African states, failed states, and then when you talk about this idea of being one united continent, free movement and all this stuff, they become skeptical about this. And I think it also feeds into some of the leaders of these countries. I don't think we are buying into this. I don't think a lot of African leaders are buying into this. Otherwise, we could be doing it. And the fact that many people consider your AUs, your SADC as useless institutions, how can people believe United Africa will actually work out?
How can Africans make their politicians buy into this, or actually bring into power politicians who actually buy into this?
Like I said, the citizens themselves, they may be skeptical about doing it. So if they are, I don't think they'll encourage their leaders to do it. Like we've seen in South Africa, the South African says, we don't want the Nigerians here, we don't want the Zimbabweans here. Such kind of thinking, it does not speak to a united Africa. I'm afraid we are not going there.
Thank you very much, Alfred Masokola. I'm going to get 3 questions, only 3 questions from the floor. And I'm going to select, and I'll apologize later.
May I add a different dynamic to the conversation and bring some point of departure?
Yes.
Prof, I've previously argued that the International Criminal Court has done a disservice to Africa, and the Rome Statute itself, in its own black letter, is drafted in such a way that power still resides in the Security Council, and it was clear from the beginning that the International Criminal Court is going to be biased against Africans. What do you think of the idea and the argument that Africa needs its own regional criminal court?
The very fact that you have these international courts is in an admission that your own domestic system is inefficient and is hamstrung by local politics and is incapable of delivering justice. And further, it is also an admission that African institutions cannot deliver. And they cannot deliver because they are not well resourced. If the African Union was a body that was worth its salt, there is no reason why we should not have African institutions. In fact, I was questioning only the other day that if African Union was a body that was concerned about continental issues, there would have been an emergency meeting of heads of states and government when there were these attacks in South Africa. But the fact that African Union is financed from outside means that its agenda is also largely controlled from outside. The day that we begin to address and to finance our activities, then we'll have our institutions, and those institutions will begin to work. And we have seen in the recent past through, of course, these were externally financed, but when we saw what happened with the trials in former Sierra Leone, the indictment of President Hissène Habré of Chad in Senegal, it tells you that we are capable of doing things. The ongoing indictment of Omar el-Bashir in Sudan is indicative of the fact that when we are committed to it, it can be done. And I cite these examples because they are current examples. Omar el-Bashir is being indicted as I speak, and those who served in the government of Bouteflika in Algeria are also being indicted. I therefore can't agree with you more that whenever we externalize our problems, it is an admission of our inadequacy as a people, and the others will invariably look down upon us and upon our institutions.
Thank you, Professor. Another question here.
Thank you, Professor. My question to you is around the issue of debt, and I know that you've already touched on this earlier. We've seen Chinese presence in Africa is quite significant, but it's not only in Africa. We are seeing that China is really, a lot of countries are indebted towards China. So my question is, if you look at countries like Zambia, which are really up to knee-level debt to China, where there are even talks of some state assets being taken by China, how do we get out of that situation? And I think this will also be useful not only for African countries, but for the entire continent, because there's this ambitious China Belt and Road Initiative that they're unfolding.
There are 3 books that I would recommend for one's reading in response to that question. One of them, in fact, 3 of them are by Zambia's lady Dambisa Felicia Moyo. One of them is Dead Aid. And in Dead Aid, Felicia Moyo says, and I agree with her, that you cannot borrow yourself out of poverty. You can't. The other one that she has written, Winner Takes All, The Rise of China in Africa, she also acknowledges that China's appetite for natural resources is so high that if we do not check ourselves, we'll find ourselves under the clutches of China. And the most recent book written in 2018, On the Edge of Chaos, she talks about the danger that this poses, particularly with the young population. My prescription, therefore, is that African countries must borrow with wisdom. And I would have thought myself that under the aegis of the African Union and the African Development Bank, we should have controlled our borrowing, particularly in the area of infrastructure. I see no reason why all our infrastructural borrowing should not be midwifed through the African Development Bank, so that even if we are borrowing from China or borrowing from the Bretton Woods institution, there is an African element in it. I know people will argue that some of these things are bilateral, but it's bilateralism that is killing us. Because when it is bilateral and you have Zambia borrowing from China, then it is not a borrowing of equals. And the Chinese have an agenda which is clear. And I don't blame them because they are very clear on what they want. It is us who lack clarity. You and me know that when you borrow for infrastructure, these are social investments which take hundreds of years to recoup. So I can't agree with you more that going forward, we must ask ourselves, do we have the ability to pay? And if we don't have the ability to pay, can we have different models? And if we have those models, can we leverage them at either regional level or at continental level? Because if we don't, then we are going to be in trouble. And we have seen already what has happened with Chinese loans in Sri Lanka, where they are saying we are going to manage your ports until we recover. We have seen how they have taken over the mining sector in countries such as Zambia. We have seen how they are building the railways and, of course, the road network that you've talked about. Lastly, I want you to remember in 1985, Thomas Sankara, when he had just become the president of Burkina Faso, did make a very passionate speech at the the meeting of the OAU, then saying that Africa should now negotiate for the forgiveness of all debts. And the world owes Africa that. If that were to happen, then we start on a clean slate with a population that is a lot more aware now. Then we could ensure that our government spend only in areas that will be beneficial to us. And if we can succeed 7 out of 10 times, then I think we can continue to control our resources. I conclude by telling you that it can't be done. Look at Norway. Norway discovered oil only very recently. Norway with a population of no more than, I don't think, 11 million, even that may be exaggerated. Norway now has a sovereign fund from oil of $1 trillion. $1 trillion. Efficient management of resources, so that notionally now, a Norwegian who is born has to his or her credit nearly $200,000. You look at your typical African, an African child whose parents have not been born already have debts.
Thank you, Professor Lumumba.
Yeah.
Talking about this management of resources, in closing, it's sometimes, this equal distribution is sometimes said to breed dictators, like we had in Libya, where Muammar Gaddafi was accused of being a dictator. How do we move from rejecting neocolonialism and imperialists and distribute our resources equally, but also maintain political hygiene?
First of all, I don't believe in equal distribution of resources. It's unachievable. The communist countries thought it could be achieved. I believe in equitable distribution of resources and provision of basic services. And I think the people that have done this very well are the Scandinavian countries. Look at Scandinavian countries, free education from university, from kindergarten to university, free healthcare system, almost free transportation. Once you provide those basic things, and even the salary differences, if you look at the salary differential in many Scandinavian countries between the highest paid and the lowest paid, is never above 30 percentage points. And I think that that can be achieved. So what one is talking about, and I think is achievable, is to ensure that you provide basic services for free. And I've already said it, and I'm repeating it for special effect. Give me free and quality education from kindergarten to university. Give me free health care. Give me good roads. Give me all these things. Give me good pension. Make sure that disadvantaged people are given opportunities. Give me welfare system, or rather unemployed benefits up to a certain period, and that can be achieved. You, Botswana, don't speak about it. But Botswana at one time was the only African country on the continent with a budget surplus. At one time.
Yes.
If it could happen here, why can't it not happen in other parts of the world? If you achieved it before, why can't you achieve it now? And remember, going forward, many people are going to lose jobs in Africa. The more we embrace technology, a job that was being undertaken by 20 people is now going to be undertaken by one computer. How are you going to deal with that situation? So to me, the fourth industrial revolution is something that we should embrace. but ask ourselves, how are we going to behave in the face of the fourth industrial revolution?
Yes.
How are we going to embrace that technology?
Yes.
Yeah.
As we come to a conclusion, Meti, would you like to ask something?
There's this gentleman with a burning question. We must not deny him.
There you go.
As the world is moving into fourth and industrial revolution, the Japanese, Chinese, and Americans, they are making it so easy for Africans to buy into their industries in China, Japan, and America. What would be your advice in that regard? Because to my understanding is that they want us to buy into their industries, that they can expand their industries. Because if they make it so easy for us to buy in Africa in their industries, the industries will expand there in Japan, China, and America. What would be your advice in that regard?
My own view is that Africans must make a deliberate decision to do that which is right for them. Let me give you an example which you will be familiar with. You know that very recently the United States government had sanctions against Huawei, the major Chinese technology firm. And they even told Apple and Google not to buy them operating system. Within a few months, Huawei had come up with their own operating system, abandoning Android. That is what we should do. If we can have our own things, if we can make deliberate effort that the University of Botswana, in collaboration with universities within SADC, say that we now want to go into solar technology, and that as they are talking about electric cars, we are going to deal with solar cars. The decision must be deliberate, it must be conscious, it must be concerted, and we must ensure that we work at it. Because the world, really, Charles Darwin is still right. The world is a jungle, survival for the fittest and the dying of the least suitable. Nobody is, and even if you want to be spiritual about it, look at the Bible or any of these books. It says, go ye and subdue the world. If you allow the world to subdue you, then I think it is your problem. So we must just do the right thing. Let us subdue the world. This sun that you complain about here in Botswana, and we complain about in Namibia, and complain about everywhere in Africa, others are asking if only we could have this sun. The Danes, the Norwegians, the Finns are asking if only we could have half the sun that they have in Botswana. Here we are complaining about it. Let us harness it. And if we harness it, and I want to say a very painful thing, whether you like it or not, how is it that this South Africa, which is in the same continent with us, managed during the apartheid era to do what they did? It is because the whites, whether you like them or not, loved themselves so much that they did things that benefited them, which means it can't be done. We must love ourselves so much that we do things that benefit us. The day we love ourselves sufficiently, you wait what we'll do. Sometimes I don't think we love ourselves.
Thank you, Professor
Thank you.
Lumumba. We will water the tree,
Yes.
and another generation will cultivate the tree.
Yes.
Another generation will prune the tree,
Yeah.
and another generation will enjoy herself.
Thank you. Thank you very much. God bless you. Thank you.